I never imagined that the day I buried my parents would also be the day I lost my home and my place in the family. As the coffin was lowered into the frozen ground and the sound of dirt hitting wood echoed through the cemetery, I stood there numb, staring at the grave, thinking if I didn't move, maybe this moment would rewind itself. The cold air burned my lungs, but I barely felt it. All I could think about was how quiet everything suddenly felt. No voices, no guidance, no parents to stand behind me anymore. Just silence and the uneasy feeling that something far worse than grief was waiting for me. After the funeral ended, people offered hollow condolences and walked away. When my older sister told me we should go back to the house together, I followed without question, because that place was still home to me, or at least I believed it was at the time. The drive was silent, her hands tight on the steering wheel, my eyes fixed on the passing streets. I sensed tension, but grief made me ignore it. I had no idea that this ride would be the last time I would ever return as family. Inside the living room, the air felt heavy and unfamiliar. The family lawyer opened the will with a calm voice that felt out of place. He spoke about properties and assets, and when he said everything had been left to my sister, my chest tightened, but I still waited, believing my parents wouldn't leave me with nothing. When a thin envelope was finally placed in front of me, my sister snatched it before I could even touch it, tore it open, and laughed when she saw the debit card inside. She threw it at me and said this was all I deserved, $1,000 and nothing more. She looked at me with pure disgust and said my parents only felt sorry for me because I was adopted, that I was never really one of them. Her words hit harder than the loss itself, and I couldn't even find my voice to defend myself. She pointed toward the door and told me to leave immediately. No time to pack, no chance to say goodbye to the house I grew up in, just a command to disappear from her life. The door slammed behind me as I stepped into the freezing evening, snow crunching under my feet, my hands shaking as I stared at the debit card in my palm. That was the moment I understood that grief was not the worst pain, betrayal was. I walked away not knowing where I would sleep that night, only knowing that my old life was over, and the thing she threw away would one day force the truth into the open. I stood there for a long moment after the door slammed behind me, staring at the house like it might open again if I waited long enough. The windows glowed warm from the inside, my parents' house, my childhood, everything familiar now sealed shut. The cold crept in fast, snow soaking through my shoes as the evening darkened. My hands shook not just from the weather, but from the shock of how quickly I had been erased. One moment I was family, the next I was nothing. I started walking without a plan. Down the long driveway, past the trees my father planted, past the porch light my mother always forgot to turn off. Each step felt heavier than the last, like I was walking away from my entire identity. My phone felt like a brick in my pocket. I checked it anyway. No messages, no missed calls, no one asking where I was. That silence hurt more than my sister's words. By the time I reached the street, my teeth were chattering uncontrollably. Cars passed without slowing, headlights cutting through the snow like I wasn't even there. I realized then how invisible a person becomes once they no longer belong anywhere. I called the only person I could think of, my best friend. My voice broke the moment he answered. He didn't ask questions, just told me to come over immediately. That kindness kept me standing. That night I slept on a couch in a small apartment that smelled like coffee and old laundry, wrapped in a blanket that wasn't mine, staring at the ceiling, replaying my sister's face over and over, wondering how love could disappear so easily. In the morning I emptied my pockets onto the table, a cracked phone, a few dollars, and that debit card. I stared at it for a long time, anger rising in my chest. I bent it until the plastic almost snapped, wanting to destroy the last thing tying me to them. But I stopped, not because of the money, but because I needed proof of what they did to me, proof that I didn't imagine that night. I slid the card deep into my wallet and made a promise to myself that I would never ask them for anything again. no matter how hard things became. That decision cost me more than I knew at the time, because the next 5 years would test everything I thought I was capable of surviving. The first year after that night felt like punishment without a sentence. I worked wherever someone would pay me in cash or minimum wage, washing dishes, cleaning floors, carrying boxes, jobs where no one asked questions because no one cared. I rented a basement room that flooded every time it rained. The walls smelled like mold, an old regret. The heater worked only when it felt like it. Winter nights were spent fully dressed under thin blankets, listening to pipes knock like they were warning me not to get comfortable. Every paycheck disappeared the moment it arrived. Rent, food, bus fare, nothing left over, not even room for hope. I learned how hunger changes the way you think, how pride becomes a luxury you can't afford. I avoided mirrors because the man looking back felt older than he should have been, shoulders slumped, eyes tired. The kind of tired sleep doesn't fix. I stopped talking about my family because explaining hurt more than staying silent. Sometimes I heard things about my sister through people who didn't know who I was. Stories about parties, renovations, expensive cars parked in the driveway I used to shovel every winter. They spoke with admiration. I listened with my jaw clenched, saying nothing. I never went near the house, not even once. Some places hurt more from a distance than up close. I focused on surviving, not living. Surviving became my full-time job. The debit card stayed hidden in my wallet the whole time, untouched, a reminder and a warning. Every time things got bad, I felt it there, like it was daring me to give up. I refused. By the 3rd year, my body started paying the price. Constant pain in my back, hands always stiff, a cough that wouldn't go away in winter. I ignored it because doctors cost money and pain was free. I told myself this was temporary, that if I just worked harder, things would turn around. That belief was the only thing keeping me upright. Then one afternoon, everything collapsed at once. Not because of my sister, not because of the past, but because my body finally said no. That was the day I got hurt at work, and the day I realized I had absolutely nothing left to fall back on. The accident didn't feel dramatic when it happened. No shouting, no sirens, just a sharp flash of pain that made my hand go numb and my stomach drop. A boiling pot slipped, skin burned, and suddenly I was on the floor staring at the ceiling, wondering how something so small could end everything. At the clinic, the doctor barely looked at me, wrapped my arm, said I needed time off or it would get infected, his voice flat like he was reading weather. I nodded even though my chest tightened, because time off meant no pay, and no pay meant eviction. My manager didn't argue, didn't threaten, didn't even look sorry. He just said if I didn't show up, someone else would. That's how replaceable I had become. I walked out, holding my arm and laughing quietly, because crying felt like work I couldn't afford. Back in my room, the silence pressed in. The eviction notice sat on the table like it had been waiting for me. Rent due, medicine needed, food already low. I counted what I had, and it wasn't even close. That's when my hand touched the card in my wallet, the same one I hadn't used in 5 years, the one my sister threw at me like trash. I sat there staring at it for a long time, arguing with myself, telling myself I didn't need it, telling myself I wasn't that desperate. But pain changes your principles. Hunger rewrites your rules. I told myself I would take the $1,000, just enough to survive, just enough to stop the bleeding in my life. Then I would disappear again. The bank was warm and clean and smelled like money. I felt every eye on me as I stood in line, wearing a jacket that had seen better decades. My arm throbbed under the bandage. My head buzzed. When I reached the counter, the teller looked at me, then at the card, then back at me like she already knew the story she had written in her head. She asked if the card even worked anymore. I said yes, because I needed it to. She swiped it slowly, bored, careless, and then everything changed. The sound that came from her screen wasn't normal. Not a beep, not a decline. A sharp alarm that cut through the room and froze everyone in place. Conversations stopped, heads turned, security shifted. My heart dropped straight through my chest. I thought my sister had reported it stolen, thought I was about to be arrested, thought this was how my life ended, humiliated and broke. But the teller didn't look angry. She looked scared, pale, hands shaking as she stared at the screen. She picked up the phone and whispered into it while staring at me like I wasn't supposed to exist. That was the moment I knew this card was never what I thought it was. And whatever was about to happen next was going to change everything. They didn't call the police. They didn't ask me questions. They didn't raise their voices. Instead, two men in suits appeared from behind a glass door and asked me to follow them, their tone polite but urgent, like something fragile was about to break. They led me past the counters, into a quiet room with leather chairs and framed certificates on the wall, the kind of room you only see in movies or when you're in trouble. I sat down slowly, still holding my burned arm, still waiting for someone to accuse me of something. The manager placed the card on the table between us like it was evidence, not money, not plastic, something heavier, something dangerous. He asked me where I got it. I told him the truth, that it was given to me after my parents' funeral, that I was told it had $1,000 on it, nothing more. His face changed, not disbelief, not anger, something closer to shock mixed with respect. He took a breath and told me this card wasn't a debit card. Not really. It was an access key. I didn't understand the words at first. My head was still buzzing. He turned a screen toward me and asked me to look carefully. The numbers took a second to register, then another second to make sense, then my vision blurred. The balance wasn't 1,000, it wasn't 10,000, it wasn't even something my brain could grab onto easily. It was millions, sitting there quietly, untouched, waiting. I laughed once, not because it was funny, but because it was impossible. I told him there had to be a mistake, that I had slept on floors, skipped meals, stitched my own clothes, that I had almost lost my home because I couldn't pay for medicine. He nodded slowly and said the account had been dormant by design, locked under a timed trust, inaccessible until a specific date. Until today. That's when the door opened again, and a man I hadn't seen since the funeral walked in. The family lawyer, older now, heavier eyes, carrying a folder that looked like it held answers I wasn't ready for. He sat across from me and said my parents had planned this, not the cruelty, not the exile, but the survival. He told me they knew my sister would destroy anything she touched, that she was already buried in debt, already desperate before they died. They hid the money from her, hid it from everyone, even from me. Because if she knew it existed, she would have taken it, forced me to give it up, ruined me the way she ruined everything else. The house was bait, the card was camouflage, the pain was the price of protection. I sat there shaking as the truth settled in. Every cold night, every empty stomach, every moment I thought I was unwanted had been part of a plan to keep me alive. I didn't know whether to cry or scream or forgive ghosts who couldn't answer back. All I knew was that the life I survived by sheer will had been built on a lie meant to save me. And somewhere across the city, my sister was still living like a queen, completely unaware that the ground under her feet was already gone. I didn't go home after the bank. I sat in my car for almost an hour with the engine off, staring at the steering wheel, trying to understand how a life could be split so cleanly into before and after without warning. The lawyer explained everything slowly, not because I was stupid, but because the truth was heavy. My parents had watched my sister burn money for years, gamble it away, borrow against things she didn't own yet, charm lenders she had no intention of paying back. They knew if they left her control of liquid cash, she would destroy it and then come for me. So they did the only thing they could. They made me look disposable, they made her feel powerful, and they hid the real inheritance somewhere she would never look. Something small enough to ignore, something she would throw away without checking. The trust had matured that morning, quietly, automatically. The clock my parents set had run out, and the protection was over. The lawyer told me the house was already in foreclosure. My sister had refinanced it multiple times, borrowed against it like it was a bottomless well, and now the bank was done waiting. There was going to be an emergency auction the next morning, blind, fast, final. I didn't hesitate. I told him to bid. Not in my name, not openly. I wanted it quiet, clean, anonymous. I didn't want revenge yet. I wanted certainty. That night I slept better than I had in years, not because I felt safe, but because for the first time the future wasn't a wall. It was a door. The next morning I got the call. The house was mine, signed, sealed, transferred. My sister never even knew who bought it. She was still calling lenders, still begging people who had already written her off. I drove past the old neighborhood that afternoon and parked down the street. I didn't go in right away. I watched instead, moving trucks, police cars, neighbors pretending not to stare while staring anyway. I saw her on the porch screaming at someone on the phone, waving papers, blaming everyone but herself. I saw her husband pacing like a trapped animal, already looking for a way out. When I finally stepped out of the car, she didn't recognize me at first. Not in clean clothes, not standing straight, not silent. The moment she did recognize me, everything changed. Her face drained, her voice broke. The story she had told herself for 5 years collapsed in real time. She demanded answers, demanded explanations, demanded mercy. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't argue, I just told her the truth. The same truth she never bothered to look for. This house was never hers. It was never meant to be, and the moment she threw me out, she signed her own ending without knowing it. When the locks were changed and the gates closed, I stood alone in the driveway, not victorious, not happy, just finally finished. And for the first time since the funeral, the silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like peace. I walked through the house alone after everyone was gone. No police, no movers, no shouting, just empty rooms and echoes of a life that had once felt permanent. The furniture was covered in sheets. The walls still carried old photos marks, and every step reminded me that this place had never really rejected me. People did. I went into my parents' bedroom last, the one room my sister never changed. Maybe because even she couldn't touch it without feeling something crack. The air still smelled faintly like my mother's perfume, and that was when everything I had held back finally caught up with me. I sat on the edge of the bed and let myself feel it. The anger, the grief, the years of being told I was less, the nights I went hungry while she lived large, the humiliation of surviving when I didn't know I didn't have to. But anger didn't last. It never does when the truth is clear. What replaced it was something quieter, something heavier, understanding. My parents didn't save me by giving me money. They saved me by forcing me to become someone who could survive without it. They took my comfort so I could build my spine. They let me hate them so I could live. That night my sister tried to call, then text, then voicemail. Her words moved from rage to panic to pleading. She talked about family, about blood, about how unfair life was. I listened to one message all the way through, then deleted the rest, not because I hated her, but because I finally understood that rescuing her would only restart the cycle. I didn't throw her out the way she threw me out. I gave her time to collect her things. I let the law handle the rest. I didn't add cruelty where consequences were already enough. Weeks later, I sold the house, not because it hurt too much, but because it belonged to a chapter that had closed. I kept one thing, a small photo of my parents from before everything went wrong, smiling like they knew how it would end. I paid my debts, fixed my life, and for the first time ever I stopped living in reaction to someone else's choices. People still ask me if I feel guilty, if I regret not helping her more, if I think blood should have mattered more than behavior. And this is what I tell them. Family is not who claims you when it's convenient. Family is who protects you when it costs them something. My parents understood that. My sister never did. So here's my question to you. If someone takes everything from you, lies about you, erases you, and only remembers you when they lose power, do they deserve forgiveness, or do they deserve the truth? Tell me what you think in the comments, because this story ends here, but the judgment belongs to you.